CHAPTER VIII. A Sylvan Idyll. In the morning the Viscount Massetti's arm was found to be so much swollen and his wound so painful that it was deemed advisable to send for a physician who resided in a neighboring hamlet not more than a mile distant from the cabin of the Solaras. The man of medicine was soon at Giovanni's bedside. After examining and dressing his hurt, he declared that the patient ought not to be moved for at least a week, a piece of intelligence at which the young man inwardly rejoiced, notwithstanding all the torture he suffered, for his sojourn involved nursing at the hands of the beautiful Annunziata, who had already shown him that she possessed tenderness and a kind heart, as well as good looks. Espérance held a conference with his friend after the physician's departure to decide upon what should be done. He proposed to go at once to Rome and acquaint the Viscount's family with what had happened and Giovanni's condition, but the young man firmly opposed this plan, declaring that he would be well in a few days at most, and protesting that informing his relatives of his situation would involve explanations he had no desire to give. Giovanni also begged Espérance to remain with him and give no sign as to their place of retreat. So earnestly did he solicit these favors that the son of Monte Cristo, much against his will and with many forebodings, finally consented to grant them. Pasquale Solara returned home late on the day following the arrival of the strangers at his hut. He was an old but sturdy shepherd, whose rough, sunburned visage spoke of exposure to the weather and hard toil. He frequently was absent for days and nights in succession, absences that he never explained and about which his son and daughter did not dare to question him, for Pasquale was a harsh man who grew angry at the slightest pretext and was inclined to be severe with all who sought to pry into his affairs. He expressed great fear of the bandits who infested the vicinity of Rome, and especially of Luigi Vampa's band, but those who knew him best shook their heads doubtingly, and though they did not say so, it was plainly to be seen that they deemed this fear merely assumed for purposes of his own. At any rate, it was a significant fact that Pasquale was never disturbed in his wanderings, while the brigands always left his dwelling and its inmates unmolested. The old shepherd frowned darkly when informed by his children that they had given shelter to a couple of travelers, one of whom had been wounded in a fight with a brigand, but he said nothing and appeared disposed to accept the situation without even a grumble. He did not, however, enter the chamber in which Giovanni lay, and avoided coming in contact with Espérance, who caught but a passing glimpse of him ere he departed again on another expedition, which he did after a stay of only half an hour at his cabin. The young peasant and Espérance soon became quite friendly, indulging in many a ramble in the forest and beside the gurgling brook. The peasant's name was Lorenzo, and he appeared to lead a free life, totally unencumbered with avocation of any kind, save occasionally looking after a few sheep that never strayed far from the banks of the little stream. Annunziata, for the time, abandoned her visits to Rome, installing herself as Giovanni's nurse. She was almost constantly beside him, and her presence and care were more potent medicines than any the physician administered. Her smile seemed to exercise a bewitching effect upon the young Viscount, while her voice sounded in his ravished ear like the sweetest music. The handsome girl was the very picture of perfect health, and her well-developed form had all the charm of early maturity added to youthful freshness and grace. She wore short skirts, and her shapely limbs were never encumbered with stockings, while her feet were invariably bare. A low, loose body with short sleeves displayed her robust neck and shoulders, and plump, dimpled arms that would have been the envy of a duchess. Her hands as well as her feet were not small, and the sun had given them a liberal coat of brown, but they were neatly turned and attractive, while her short, taper fingers were tipped with pink, carefully trimmed nails. Altogether she looked like the spirit of the place, a delicious wood nymph, as enchanting as any a poet's fancy ever created, and yet a substantial mortal reality, well calculated to fire a man's blood and set his brain in a whirl. If she had appeared beautiful in Rome, amid the aristocratic fashion queens of the Piazza del Popolo, she seemed 1,000-fold more delightful and fascinating in her humble forest home, where she shook off all restraint and showed herself as she really was, a bright, innocent child of nature, as pure as the breath of heaven and as free from guile as the honey-fed butterfly of the summer sunshine. The more Giovanni saw of her, the more he came under the dominion of her irresistible charms, the empire of her physical attractiveness. Gradually he mended, and as his wound healed his strength returned. At length, towards the close of the week, he was able to quit his bed and sit in a large chair by the window of his room. It had been agreed upon between him and Espérance that during their sojourn at the Solara cabin they should be known respectively as Antonio Valpi and Giuseppe Sagasta, and already Annunziata had bestowed upon her patient the friendly and familiar diminutive of Tonio, a name to which he answered with wildly beating heart and eyes that spoke volumes. By means of shrewdly managed questions, the young Viscount had ascertained that the flower girl had no lover, that her breast had never owned the tender passion, and this intelligence added fuel to the flame that was consuming him. It is not to be supposed that Annunziata was ignorant of the strong impression she had made upon her youthful and handsome patient. She was perfectly aware of it, and secretly rejoiced at the manifest exhibition of the power of her charms. Perhaps she did not as yet love Giovanni. Perhaps it was merely the general physical attraction of a woman towards a man, or it might have been that innate spice of coquetry common to every female, but the fact remained that she tacitly encouraged the young Viscount in his ardent attentions to her. She, moreover, lured and inflamed him in such a careless, innocent way that she acquired additional piquancy thereby. Had Annunziata been a designing woman of the world, intent upon trapping a wealthy lover, instead of a pure and artless country maid, totally unconscious of the harm she was working, she could not have played her game with more effect. Giovanni had become altogether her slave. He hung upon her smiles, drank her words, and could hardly restrain himself in her presence. No shipwrecked mariner ever more greedily devoured with his dazzled eyes the fateful Lorelei of a rocky, deserted coast than he did her. Had she been his social equal, had her intelligence and education matched her personal beauty, he would have forgotten Zuleika, thrown himself impetuously at her feet, and solicited her hand. As it was, while Monte-Cristo's daughter possessed his entire heart, Annunziata Solara enslaved his senses. She received his approaches as a matter of course, without diffidence, without a blush. His gallant speeches pleased her, she did not know why. So thoroughly unsuspicious was she that she failed to notice his language was not that of the untutored peasant he claimed to be, that his bearing as well as his words indicated a degree of culture and refinement far above his assumed station. She was dazzled, charmed by him as the bird is by the glittering serpent with its wicked, fascinating eyes. She thought of nothing but the present and its novel joys. She had never heeded the future. She did not heed it now. One morning, as she sat at his side by the open window, through which stole the balmy air of the forest, laden with the intoxicating perfume of 1,000 wild, intensely sweet flowers, Giovanni suddenly took her brown hand, covering it with passionate kisses. The girl did not resist, did not withdraw her hand from his. She did not even tremble, though a slight glow came into her cheeks, making her look like a very Circe. "Annunziata," said Giovanni in a low voice, scarcely above a whisper, "do you care for me?" "Care for you, Tonio?" replied the girl, gazing sweetly into his glowing and agitated countenance. "Oh, yes, I care a great deal for you." He threw his arm about her neck, and as his hand lay upon her shapely shoulder, a magnetic thrill shot through him like a sudden shock from a powerful electric battery. Annunziata did not seek to withdraw herself from his warm embrace, and he drew her to him with tightening clasp until her full, palpitating bosom rested against his breast. Her tempting red lips, slightly parted, were upturned. He placed his upon them in a long, lingering, delirious kiss. Then the color deepened in her cheeks, and she gently disengaged herself. She did not, however, avert her eyes, but gazed into his with a look of mute inquiry. All this was new to her, and the more delicious because of its entire novelty. "Neither my father nor my brother nor my dead mother ever kissed me like that," she said artlessly. Giovanni was enraptured. The girl's innocence was absolutely marvelous. He had never dreamed that such innocence existed upon earth. Was she really what she appeared? "Annunziata," he said abruptly, his heart beating furiously and his breath coming thick and fast, "you have never experienced love, or you would know the meaning of that kiss." "Love?" answered the girl, opening her large, lustrous eyes widely. "Oh, yes, I have felt love. I love my father and Lorenzo. I love everybody." "But not as you would love a young man who would throw himself at your pretty feet and pour out the treasures of his heart to you." "No young man has ever done that," said Annunziata, smiling and nestling closer to him. "But some one will before long, perhaps before many minutes. How would you like me to be that one?" cried the Viscount in his headlong fashion. "I cannot tell," answered the girl. "I do not know." "Then let me try the experiment," said Giovanni, rising from his chair and sinking on his knees in front of her. "Annunziata, I love you." The girl stroked his hair and then passed her taper fingers through his flowing locks. She was silent and seemed to be thinking. Her bosom heaved just a little more than usual, and the glow on her cheeks became a trifle more intense. Giovanni, yet kneeling, seized her hand, holding it in a crushing clasp. "Do you hear me?" he cried impatiently. "Do you understand me? I love you!" "You love me, Tonio?" replied the girl, slowly. "Well, it is only natural. Every young man must love some young girl some time or other, and I think I love you a little." "Think!" said Giovanni, amazed. "Do you not know it?" "Perhaps," answered Annunziata, still fondling his hair. Giovanni threw his arms about her waist, an ample, healthful waist, free from the restraints of corsets and the cramping devices of fashion. As he did so, the sound of footsteps was heard without, and he had scarcely time to leap to his feet when Espérance entered the room. Massetti was confused, and his friend noticed the fact. He also remarked that Annunziata was slightly flushed and seemed to have experienced some agreeable agitation. Espérance instantly leaped to a conclusion. Giovanni's flirtation with the fair flower girl had gone a trifle too far, had assumed a serious aspect. He would interfere, he would remonstrate with him. It might not yet be too late, after all. Annunziata was a pure and innocent creature, unused to the ways of the world and incapable of suspecting the wickedness of men. She was on the point of falling into a deadly snare, on the point of being wrecked upon the most dangerous shoal life presented. Her very purity and innocence would make her an easy victim. Giovanni was not wicked, he was merely young, the prey of the irresistible passion of youth. Annunziata's surpassing loveliness had fired his blood, had driven him to the verge of a reckless action, a crime against this beautiful girl that money could not repair. This crime should not be committed if he could help it, and he would risk the Viscount's friendship to save him from himself. Giovanni could not marry the humble peasant girl. He should not mar her future. When Espérance came into the chamber, his presence recalled Annunziata to herself and also dampened Massetti's ardor. The girl arose and, smiling at Espérance, tripped blushingly away. Giovanni was flushed and somewhat angry at the intrusion at the critical moment of his love-making. Espérance's face was grave. He felt all the weight of the responsibility he was about to assume. "Giovanni," said he, in a measured tone, "I do not blame you for being fascinated by a pretty, amiable girl like Annunziata Solara. Far from it. She is certainly a paragon of beauty, a model of rustic grace, a very tempting morsel of rural virtue and innocence. She is well fitted to turn the head of almost any young man. I freely acknowledge that. It is pardonable to wish to enjoy her society. Nay, a harmless flirtation with her is perhaps not censurable, but that is the utmost length to which a man of honor can go. Remember, she has a reputation to lose, a heart to break." "What do you mean by that long sermon?" demanded the Viscount, setting his teeth and frowning savagely. "I mean that you have been making love to this poor girl, that you have been seeking to requite her care of you in a manner but little to your credit." "I owe you my life, Espérance," replied Massetti, "but even my gratitude will not shield you from my fury if you step between me and Annunziata Solara." "You mean to pursue her, then, to soil her name, to blast her future? For surely you are not courting her with marriage as your object?" Giovanni flushed scarlet at this open accusation. "I mean to pursue her, yes. What my object in the matter is concerns only myself. You have nothing whatever to do with it," he exclaimed hotly. "But I have a great deal to do with it," replied Espérance firmly. "You shall not pursue Annunziata Solara to her destruction. Between her good name and your reckless intentions I will oppose a barrier you cannot surmount myself." "Do you mean to champion her to the extent of challenging me?" demanded Massetti, fairly foaming with ire. "If you persist in your nefarious designs, yes," answered the son of Monte Cristo, with equal warmth. "You are my friend of friends, Giovanni Massetti. But the instant you menace that innocent girl's honour, my friendship for you crumbles to dust, and you become my deadly foe. Take your choice. Either leave this hospitable cabin with me as soon as the state of your wound will permit you to do so, meanwhile respecting Annunziata Solara as you would your own sister, or meet me pistol in hand on the field of honour. Take your choice, I say. What is your decision?" "I will not give up Annunziata." "Then you must fight." "I shall not hesitate." "So be it. My life against yours. I will defend this poor girl's honour to the last drop of my blood." "When shall we fight?" "To-morrow at dawn." "Where?" "In the clearing beyond the chestnut copse on the further side of the brook. There is no need of witnesses. This matter is between us and us alone." "So much the better, for it will be a duel to the death. I cannot as yet hold my right arm aloft long enough to fight with it, but I will make my left hand serve." Then, as a sudden thought struck him, Massetti added, "Do you propose to betray me, to carry your story to Annunziata and her brother?" Espérance surveyed his companion with intense scorn flashing from his eyes. "I am no traitor," he said coldly, and turning, quitted the apartment. CHAPTER IX.